feel like I really understand that we have a responsibility to change the narrative around what we are delivering to young people in the class.
There are love stories that capture the imagination of an entire world. Stories that arrive at just the right moment, wrapped in the kind of warmth and hope that makes people believe in something bigger than themselves. When Princess Beatrice and Edoardo Mozzi exchanged their vows in the summer of 2020, it felt exactly like that. A quiet, intimate ceremony tucked inside the Royal Chapel of All Saints at Windsor, shielded from a world that was unraveling outside those ancient walls. No crowds, no fanfare, just two people choosing each other in the middle of a global storm. It was, by almost every measure, deeply romantic. But 5 years have a way of revealing what the beginning could not. What once looked like the perfect modern royal love story, understated yet genuine, unconventional yet deeply committed, is now being described in very different terms. Words like tension, distance, and irreconcilable differences are appearing in the same sentences as their names. Insiders are talking. Sources are stepping forward. And the question that no one wanted to ask out loud is now impossible to avoid. Are Princess Beatrice and Edoardo Mozzi heading toward divorce? This is not a story built on idle gossip or tabloid fantasy. It is a story built on patterns, on pressures, on the very real and very complicated intersection of royal duty, personal ambition, blended family challenges, and cultural differences that have been quietly grinding against each other for years. It is a story about what happens when two people from very different worlds try to build one life together, while an entire institution and an entire media machine watches their every move. Today, we are going to walk through every layer of this story. We are going to examine what the early signs were telling us, what the insiders are now saying, and why the differences between Beatrice and Edoardo may have always been larger than anyone was willing to acknowledge. Because sometimes, the most telling details are not the dramatic headlines. They are the quiet moments, the small fractures, the subtle distances that accumulate over time until they become something impossible to bridge. To understand where Beatrice and Edoardo are today, you have to go back to where they began. And where they began tells you quite a lot, if you are willing to look closely enough. Their wedding on the 17th of July, 2020, was unlike anything the royal family had produced in a generation. COVID-19 had brought the world to a standstill, and even the most powerful institution in Britain could not operate on its usual grand scale. The ceremony was small, attended by only a handful of family members, and it was held without the pomp and spectacle that typically defines a royal union. In place of a bespoke designer gown, Beatrice wore a vintage dress that had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, carefully altered to fit her frame. It was a choice that many described as touching, a bridge between generations, a quiet tribute to the matriarch of the family. And on the surface, everything about that day seemed to say the right things. It said that Beatrice was not interested in excess or performance. It said that Edoardo was a man content to stand beside her without demanding a grand stage. It said that their love did not need spectacle to be real. But there were things that day also could not say. It could not tell you whether the couple had truly had the time and space to understand the full weight of what they were committing to. It could not tell you whether the extraordinary circumstances of the pandemic had accelerated a timeline that might otherwise have moved more carefully. And it could not tell you about the absences. Because for those who follow royal life closely, the guest list was notable not just for who was there, but for who was not. Several senior members of the royal family did not attend. And while the pandemic provided a reasonable explanation, royal observers quietly filed that detail away. A wedding held under extraordinary circumstances is a beautiful thing. But it is also, in a sense, a wedding that was never truly tested by ordinary life before it happened. The chaos of lockdowns, the anxiety of a global health crisis, the emotional intensity of that particular moment in history, all of these things can create a kind of artificial closeness, a shared experience of hardship that feels like intimacy, but may not yet have had the chance to become it. And when the world eventually reopened, when ordinary life and its ordinary pressures returned, the real work of building a marriage had to begin. For Beatrice and Edoardo, that work was always going to be harder than it looked. One of the most underreported dimensions of this relationship is the sheer cultural distance between these two people. It is easy to look at their shared privilege and assume that their worlds are more or less the same. Both come from wealthy, well-connected families. Both move in elite social circles. Both have spent their lives surrounded by a certain degree of luxury and expectation. But beneath those surface similarities lie some genuinely significant differences that, over 5 years, appear to have grown rather than diminished. Beatrice was born into British royalty. She is the eldest daughter of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, and from the moment she came into the world, her life was shaped by the protocols, expectations, and visibility that come with that position. She grew up understanding that her actions carry institutional weight. She learned early that privacy is a privilege, not a right. She was raised to represent something larger than herself, to carry the dignity of a centuries-old monarchy even when the personal cost of doing so is significant. Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi comes from a very different tradition. His heritage is rooted in Italian aristocracy, a world that also values lineage and reputation, but one that operates by a completely different set of rules. Italian noble families have traditionally prized discretion above visibility. They have tended to guard their private lives with great care, preferring to maintain their dignity and influence through quieter channels rather than the relentless public performance that defines the British royal experience. For Edoardo, a man who built a successful property development business by navigating high-value transactions with careful professionalism, the idea of having his marriage dissected by tabloids was never going to sit comfortably. Sources familiar with the couple suggest that this fundamental difference in how each of them relates to public life has been a persistent source of friction. Beatrice cannot simply step away from the spotlight. Her identity, her family obligations, and her public duties are all tied to her royal position in ways that she cannot fully control. Edoardo, on the other hand, did not sign up for a life of constant media exposure when he began his business career, and no amount of time or acclimatization has made that exposure feel natural to him. There is also the matter of professional ambition and lifestyle. Edoardo runs an international property development company, which means his work takes him across borders with a frequency that is not always compatible with the demands of royal family life. His business requires him to be in multiple places, often at short notice, navigating the kind of high-stakes deals that do not pause for public engagements or family obligations. Beatrice, meanwhile, has her own commitments. Her charitable work, her public duties, and her role within the royal family all make their own demands on her time and energy. What emerges when you look at these two sets of demands honestly is a couple who are not simply busy. They are busy in ways that pull them in fundamentally different directions. And when that kind of divergence is combined with all the other pressures bearing down on this marriage, the cumulative weight begins to feel significant. There is a dimension to Beatrice's life that no amount of personal effort, no degree of happiness in her marriage, and no quantity of positive press coverage can fully neutralize. And that dimension is her father. Prince Andrew's fall from grace has been one of the most spectacular and damaging in the history of the modern monarchy. His association with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, the disastrous television interview he gave in 2019 in which he attempted to address the allegations surrounding him and succeeded only in deepening the crisis, and the subsequent civil lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre all combined to create a scandal of extraordinary proportions. Andrew was stripped of his royal duties. He withdrew from public life, and the family he left behind was forced to continue existing in the shadow of everything his actions had created. For Beatrice, that shadow has been a constant companion. She has navigated it with considerable dignity, maintaining a public composure that speaks to genuine strength of character. She has not commented publicly on her father's situation in ways that would create further headlines. She has continued to carry out her duties, attend events, and present herself with the kind of measured calm that the situation required. But dignity on the outside does not mean the internal cost has been anything other than enormous. People who know Beatrice will describe a woman who is deeply loyal to her family, perhaps to a fault, and who carries the emotional weight of her father's situation in ways that are not always visible. Every public appearance requires a kind of psychological preparation that most people will never have to make. Every interview, every red carpet moment, every social media post happens in the knowledge that her father's name is only ever one question away. That kind of sustained vigilance is exhausting in a way that is genuinely difficult to overstate. And now consider what it means to bring a husband into that reality. Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi is a successful, respected businessman who had built a strong professional reputation before he and Beatrice became a couple. When you marry into the royal family, you accept a degree of scrutiny as part of the arrangement. But when a family you are marrying into is navigating one of the most damaging royal scandals in modern memory, the nature of that scrutiny changes considerably. Edoardo's name now appears in the same news cycles as Andrew's. His social appearances are interpreted through the lens of the family's ongoing controversies. His choices are measured against a backdrop that he did not create and cannot control. Sources suggest that this dynamic has placed real strain on the marriage. Not because Edoardo lacks compassion for Beatrice's situation, but because the practical reality of living inside that scandal day after day, year after year, grinds on a person in ways that are hard to sustain indefinitely. The question, according to those close to the couple, is not whether Edoardo loves Beatrice. It is whether love alone is enough to sustain a marriage when the environment surrounding it is this relentlessly difficult. Before Beatrice ever entered his life, Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi was already a father. His relationship with architect and entrepreneur Dara Huang produced a son, affectionately known as Wolfie, and while the romantic relationship between Edoardo and Dara eventually came to an end, the parental relationship did not. Co-parenting kept them connected. Shared decisions about Wolfie's education, his schedule, his well-being, and his upbringing created a bond that no romantic separation could dissolve. When Beatrice and Edoardo married, she became Wolfie's stepmother, and by most accounts, she has approached that role with genuine warmth and care. Wolfie was included in the family's celebrations. He appeared alongside the couple at events. And sources say Beatrice has consistently made efforts to ensure that he feels loved and included, not as an obligation, but as a genuine expression of her affection for him. But warmth and good intentions do not eliminate complexity. Co-parenting arrangements, even when they function well, introduce a persistent third presence into a marriage. Decisions must be made collaboratively. Schedules must be coordinated. Emotions, including the emotions of the child at the center of everything, must be carefully managed. And all of this happens against the backdrop of Dara Huang's continued public profile. She is not a figure who has faded quietly from view. She is a successful professional woman with her own career, her own social presence, and her own identity that is inevitably linked in the public consciousness to the man Beatrice married. Royal coverage has a particular habit of revisiting this dynamic. Any photograph of Wolfie at a family event prompts questions about the co-parenting arrangement. Any mention of Dara Huang in a social context circles back to Edoardo, and by extension, to Beatrice. For a woman who is already managing enormous pressure from multiple directions, this constant public re-examination of her husband's previous relationship adds yet another layer of emotional labor to an already demanding life. Those who understand blended family dynamics know that even under the best circumstances, with the most cooperative co-parenting arrangements and the most genuine goodwill on all sides, the emotional terrain is complicated. There are moments of uncertainty. There are questions about roles and boundaries. There are times when the past feels present in uncomfortable ways. For Beatrice and Edoardo, all of those ordinary complexities are played out in front of an audience of millions, which means they are never just personal. They are always, in some sense, also public. And underneath all of this, there is a question that sources close to the situation have begun to raise more directly. Is the blended family dynamic, combined with everything else this couple is managing, simply too much weight for the marriage to carry? Are the emotional demands of navigating co-parenting public scrutiny, royal duty, and cultural difference, slowly depleting the resources that a marriage needs to survive and grow? One of the more concrete details to emerge from sources familiar with Beatrice and Edoardo's situation is the pattern of their living arrangements. Reports suggest that the couple has spent significant periods of time in different locations, dividing their lives between London and the Cotswolds, and that Edoardo's business commitments have frequently taken him away for extended periods. On paper, this is not unusual. Modern couples, particularly those with demanding professional lives, often navigate periods of physical separation. Long-distance arrangements and travel-heavy careers are a reality for many high-achieving people, and they do not automatically signal trouble in a relationship. But relationship experts are consistent on one point. Sustained physical distance, particularly when it is accompanied by emotional pressures from other sources, tends to create vulnerabilities in even the strongest partnerships. The small daily rituals of marriage, sharing a meal, talking through the events of the day, navigating the minor frustrations and moments of connection that accumulate into the fabric of a shared life, these are harder to maintain when partners are regularly apart. And for Beatrice and Edoardo, the periods of separation are not simply a logistical inconvenience. They happen against a backdrop of everything else this couple is managing. The public scrutiny, the family scandal, the blended family complexity, the cultural differences. When all of those pressures are already in play, the added strain of physical absence can tip a delicate balance. Sources suggest that the couple has been struggling to find enough genuine quality time together. Time that is not dominated by the demands of their respective obligations or the management of their public image. Royal life, for all its privilege, is not a life that offers its participants much genuine freedom. Every moment of apparent leisure is potentially a public moment. Every private conversation might find its way into a newspaper. The space that a marriage needs to breathe, to heal, to grow, is perpetually constrained by the institution that defines their existence. For Edoardo, a man who came to this relationship from outside the royal world, the cumulative effect of these constraints appears to have been particularly difficult. He is not someone who was born into the understanding that privacy is the exception rather than the rule. He is not someone who was raised to accept constant public scrutiny as the natural price of his existence. And sources suggest that as the years have passed, the gap between the life he imagined and the life he is actually living has become harder to ignore. No discussion of the pressures surrounding Beatrice and Edoardo's marriage would be complete without considering the role of the institution at the center of it all. Because the palace is not simply a backdrop to this story. It is an active participant, with its own interests, its own concerns, and its own very clear sense of what a royal marriage in difficulty means for the monarchy's reputation. Reports emerging from sources connected to the royal household suggest that King Charles is fully aware of the difficulties facing his niece's marriage. Those same sources describe the king as being deeply concerned not only about the personal well-being of the people involved, but about the broader implications for a monarchy that has already absorbed significant reputational damage in recent years. The combination of Harry and Meghan's departure, Prince Andrew's ongoing disgrace, and the health challenges facing senior members of the family has left the institution in a position where it can ill afford another highly publicized royal relationship breakdown. And yet, awareness and concern, however genuine, cannot resolve the underlying tensions that sources say are driving the couple apart. The palace can manage optics. It can coordinate messaging and guide public appearances. It can ensure that the couple presents a united front at official engagements. What it cannot do is address the private realities of two people who may have discovered, over 5 years, that the differences between them are more significant than they initially appeared. Insiders suggest that Beatrice herself has been candid with close family members about the state of her marriage. That level of candor, according to those familiar with royal protocol, is itself a signal. Royals are trained from childhood to manage their private lives with extreme discretion. When a member of the family begins discussing marital difficulties with senior relatives, it suggests that the situation has moved beyond the stage of private tension and into something more serious. The palace will do everything in its power to prevent this story from reaching its most dramatic conclusion. The optics of another royal divorce, particularly involving the daughter of Prince Andrew at this moment in the monarchy's history, would be genuinely damaging. But institutional pressure, however well-intentioned, has a poor track record of saving royal marriages that have reached a genuine crossroads. What makes the situation facing Beatrice and Edoardo particularly poignant is that it is not, in any meaningful sense, unique. It is, in fact, deeply familiar. The British monarchy has been here before, many times. Beatrice's own parents, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, were once the golden couple of their generation. Their wedding in 1986 was a national celebration, a moment of joy and pageantry that captured the public imagination. And yet within years, the pressures of royal life, the demands of duty, the relentless media scrutiny, and the personal differences that neither love nor privilege could resolve, had pulled them apart. Their divorce in 1996 was a public spectacle that left both of them navigating the remainder of their lives in ways they had not anticipated. The marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana followed an even more dramatic arc. That union, projected to the world as the ultimate fairy tale, became one of the most analyzed and dissected relationships in modern history. The incompatibilities, the emotional distances, the competing desires for autonomy and belonging, all of these played out in public with consequences that reverberated far beyond the couple themselves. Diana's tragic death in 1997 cast a shadow over the monarchy that is still felt today. And more recently, the decision of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle to step back from their royal duties in 2020 demonstrated that even the most modern, self-aware approach to royal life cannot fully neutralize the pressures that the institution generates. Harry and Meghan did not simply drift apart under the weight of royal expectation. They made an active, deliberate choice to prioritize their personal well-being over their institutional obligations, and even that choice came at an enormous personal and public cost. Each of these stories, Andrew and Sarah, Charles and Diana, Harry and Meghan, shares a common thread. Royal marriages do not simply fail because the people in them stop loving each other. They fail because the environment surrounding them is uniquely, extraordinarily hostile to the ordinary ingredients that make marriages work. Privacy, autonomy, personal space, the freedom to make mistakes without them becoming headlines, the ability to grow and change without that growth being publicly scrutinized and judged. All of these things, which most couples take for granted, are simply not available to people living inside the royal institution. For Beatrice and Edoardo, the pattern holds. They are not uniquely incompatible. They are not uniquely troubled. They are, in a very real sense, simply the latest chapter in a story the monarchy has been living for generations. 5 years is a meaningful interval in a marriage, long enough for the initial intensity of romantic love to have settled into something deeper and more tested, long enough for the realities of shared life to have revealed themselves fully, long enough for the genuine nature of compatibility and incompatibility to become unmistakably clear. What 5 years appears to have revealed about Beatrice and Edoardo is a picture that is both sympathetic and sobering. Two people who genuinely cared for each other. Two people who made a sincere commitment in the middle of a crisis, who welcomed a daughter together, who navigated blended family dynamics with care and goodwill, who faced enormous external pressures without, for a long time, letting them visibly fracture their public partnership. And yet, according to sources now speaking with increasing candor, the private picture tells a different story. A story of differences that were always present, but that time and pressure have made impossible to manage. A story of a woman who carries the weight of royal identity and family scandal with extraordinary grace, but who has perhaps been carrying too much for too long without sufficient support. A story of a man who loved that woman genuinely, but who may have underestimated, or eventually found himself unable to sustain, the full cost of the life that loving her requires. The word divorce is a heavy one. It carries implications that extend far beyond the two people it directly affects. For a family already navigating reputational damage, institutional pressure, and the ongoing fallout from multiple crises, the public dissolution of Beatrice's marriage would be another significant blow. And for Beatrice herself, who has shown throughout her life a genuine commitment to doing things properly and with dignity, the prospect of that particular outcome must be deeply painful to contemplate. But marriages, even royal ones, cannot be sustained by institutional pressure and public performance alone. They require the presence of things that no palace can provide: mutual understanding, genuine compatibility, the ability to meet each other in the quiet, private, unobserved moments that constitute the actual substance of a shared life. And if those things have eroded beyond recovery, then all the goodwill and all the institutional management in the world cannot prevent the inevitable. The story of Princess Beatrice and Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi is, at its core, a deeply human story wearing royal clothes. It is a story about two people who tried, who came together in extraordinary circumstances, who built a life across significant cultural and personal distances, who navigated pressures that would test any couple, and who may, in the end, discover that trying is not always enough. Whether the word divorce ultimately defines the next chapter of their story remains to be seen. The palace will work to prevent it. The couple may yet find a path through the pressures bearing down on them. Love and the shared history of 5 years and a daughter and all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that fill a life together is not a small thing. But the differences that sources describe are not small things either. They are the kind of differences that accumulate quietly, that resist easy resolution, and that have a way of eventually becoming the story, regardless of how carefully anyone tries to manage the narrative around them. The world watched Beatrice and Edoardo choose each other in the summer of 2020. It watched them with hope and warmth and the particular tenderness that people feel toward love stories that arrive in dark times. Whatever comes next, that moment was real. And whatever its ultimate outcome, the story of this marriage, its pressures, its complexities, and its place within the longer arc of the monarchy's own complicated history, is one that deserves to be told with honesty, with nuance, and with genuine compassion for the people